US President Donald Trump will now go down in history as the only president to have been impeached twice, the second impeachment coming just days before his term of office expires. Now, the US House of Representatives yesterday voted to impeach him for inciting the mob attack on the Capitol in which 5 people died, but his Senate trial is expected to begin on January 19th. That's at the earliest, making the days leading up to the inauguration a political cliffhanger. If Trump is indicted by the Senate, he may never run for office again, and the Republican Party will be given a new start in many ways. For more on the story, we're joined now by Hermann Pretorius. He's from the Institute for Race Relations. Hermann, thanks as always for giving us your time. As someone who follows very closely the politics in the United States, you were, of course, part of our own coverage here on Newzroom Afrika as we tracked the run-up to the election and the election itself in the US. And it's something we were discussing off air, and I'm going to ask you again. You know, when we were trying to predict the outcome of the US elections, either for a Biden win or for a Trump win, would you have predicted then that if Trump lost, that this is what we would have seen in the weeks leading up to a Biden inauguration?
No, I would not have predicted it. And I think, as I said to you just off air, I'm actually quite regretful that I couldn't see this coming, because in hindsight, it just seems that the Trump presidency could end in no other way than the madness that we are seeing now. So I regret to say that I did not see this coming. I wish I could.
Yeah. So let's talk about the impeachment vote yesterday. 232 votes going in favor of his impeachment. That's obviously mostly Democrats, but supported by 10 Republican votes as well. Who are these Republicans that would have voted for his impeachment?
Well, I think one must understand that political parties across the world, especially in two-party systems, are broad churches, as it were. They are coalitions within themselves, a bit like our own ANC here and the DA, perhaps the two largest parties, have these various factions within them. So the question really is, these Republicans who voted for impeachment of Donald Trump, if you want to understand that question, you have to understand that the political party that they belong to is, of course, a broad church. So the 10 US representatives who voted for impeachment from the Republican side are probably these from the factions of the Republican Party that never quite fell for the Trumpian Republican Party that we've seen develop over the last 4 years. And the question now is 10 Republicans in the House of Representatives, but they need 10, or they need at least 17 Republicans in the Senate to vote to convict, as it were, because just a brief oversight is the House of Representatives, the lower house, acts as the accuser that places the president or the individual in question in a state of being accused of a specific high crime or misdemeanor. And then the Senate acts as the court. And you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to convict and ultimately remove from office. So 10 House of Representative Republicans, I didn't think they would get 10. I thought they would get 8 or so, but now they need to get about 17 in the Senate. And that is a very, very high bar that I don't think they'll meet.
So according to my understanding, they need 60 votes in the Senate for the impeachment, for him to be convicted, essentially.
Yes, I myself thought it was 60, and until I made sure in the early hours of this morning, it is apparently that something I didn't know, a 2/3 majority. So you need 67, in fact. So it's an even higher bar, because the usual process in the Senate for most votes used to be a 60-vote threshold. But this one is even higher, it would seem. So it really just makes the realistic prospect of this proceeding through the Senate, not one that I think one can realistically entertain, especially given the short time period, because we need to understand also that 3 impeachment trials for a president have been held, and they took the shortest impeachment trial took 21 days in the Senate. Now we only have we have 6 days from this point going forward until the end of Trump's inauguration, and the Georgia Senate seats have not been certified yet, and they will probably only be certified by tomorrow. So that's the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, 4 days to have an impeachment trial, the shortest of which in history has been 21 days. So it all seems a bit like political theater, but perhaps political theater with some principle behind it.
I want to talk about what Trump had to say while all of this was happening in the House of Representatives in just a moment, Hermann. I just want to keep on this issue around the impeachment trial. And it's not just a symbolic move by the Democrats and by the Republicans that would have voted in favor of his impeachment. The goal here is to prevent Trump, to disqualify him from ever being eligible to run for president again. So if the Senate does not convict him, what are his options come 2024?
Well, if the Senate does not vote to convict him, I think there's a very good chance we see a second Donald Trump run at the presidency.
And that's because Mike Pence also would not invoke the 25th Amendment.
Yes. The 25th Amendment is that piece of legislation or that constitutional mechanism that allows the vice president and cabinet to decide that the president is not fit for office. It was designed originally in terms of, medical emergency or the president losing his mind. But in this case, there are questions whether the president ever had it in the first place. But Mike Pence has said to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, that he will not invoke the 25th Amendment. And I think that's the right move from Pence. It is a very, very drastic action to take when there are more, I think, clear-cut procedures like the impeachment procedure to ensure that a president that has, I think, besmirched the office like Donald Trump has, to hold them to account. So the Republicans are really in a quandary here. I think it is in the best interest of the Republican Party to move on from Donald Trump as quickly as possible. And I say this as someone who would probably be a Republican were I in the United States. But the question really is, do you want the ghost of Donald Trump hanging over the next 4 years? This has been a painful 3 months for the Republican Party. It's now really a question of whether they can rebuild. And if Donald Trump is free to run again in 2024, either he chooses to do so, in which case he controls the Republican Party in terms of political influence for at least the next 5 to 8 years, or he doesn't, but at least then his influence makes him the most powerful Republican in America. So for pure opportunism and for a Republican Party that might want to move on, I think impeachment might not be too bad. And then, of course, personally, I think that Donald Trump did commit an impeachable offense by essentially instructing his vice president to interfere in the certification of legitimate election results. I think the worst thing the president can do is threaten American constitutional democracy. And I think that's exactly what Trump did.
Well, let's take a look at what he had to say just before those rioters descended on Capitol Hill. He says, "We are going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we are probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them because you will never take back our country with weakness." He says, "You will never take back our country with weakness." And, we know what unfolded in the hours then after he gave that rousing and rambling speech where he just went on and on, and there was that threat towards Mike Pence doing what he described should be Mike Pence's constitutional duty.
Yes, and speaking of constitutional duty, it's a real tragedy that Donald Trump was placed under the impression that Mike Pence had the power in the first place to, yes, probably himself by that definition, but Mike Pence never had the constitutional ability to just dismiss these election results. That's just not how the certification process works. The president of the Senate or the vice president oversees and facilitates the certification votes in the Senate. Now, so it's a largely formal and ceremonial role, but we also have to accept that both houses of Congress need to agree that the election results can be thrown out, and the House of Representatives would never have done that.
Yeah.
So Mike Pence was thrown under the bus by Donald Trump here. And, people might say that Trump didn't actively call for violence and did not actively, tell people to commit violent acts. But I think when you're the president of the United States of America,
with 90 million followers on Twitter.
Yes, you are not an ordinary citizen. You have to take some acknowledgement that you have power that other people do not. In other words, the freedom of speech that you have, you need to manage it voluntarily with dignity and with some self-restraint, because now your words mean something much more.
Absolutely. Hermann, I hate to cut in. I have to cut our interview short, but I want to just reflect on the remarks that Trump made, when he was asked about what he thinks about whether his remarks before the Capitol Hill riots, whether indeed he did incite that insurrection. He said his remarks were, quote, totally appropriate. That's what he said to reporters. Hermann Pretorius, it's always great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for giving us some perspective of the politics unfolding in the United States.